I always thought my life was pretty stable. Nothing extraordinary, nothing disastrous, just the kind of predictable rhythm that comes with being married for 13 years. My name's Ethan, I'm 38, and I run a small but successful IT consulting business. My wife, Julia, 36, works as a marketing director at a mid-sized firm. We've got a nice suburban home, 2 kids, Oliver, 10, and Emma, 7, and the kind of marriage that's not necessarily passionate anymore, but comfortable. That's the thing about comfort, though. It tricks you into thinking everything is fine. Julia and I met in college. She was the loud, ambitious one who could talk her way into anything, and I was the laid-back guy who let her take the lead. Over the years, I'd say we made a good team. We split the responsibilities well. She handled our social calendar, I handled the finances, she made sure the kids' schedules were intact, I made sure the house didn't fall apart. Sure, we had our occasional fights. What couple doesn't? The usual stuff, me being too absorbed in work, her always on her phone, both of us too exhausted at the end of the day to even bother with intimacy. But I chalked it up to the natural course of marriage. We were parents first, partners second. It's just how life works, right? Lately, though, something felt off. It started subtly. She started dressing up more for work, new dresses, makeup on days she used to go barefaced, perfume when she used to just throw on deodorant and call it a day. I complimented her, of course, but she shrugged it off, saying she just felt like looking nice. Then there were the late nights. She's always had work events, but they became more frequent. Team dinners. Late-night marketing presentations. She assured me they were just necessary networking. You know how it is in my industry, Ethan, she'd say. I have to be present. I trusted her. Or at least, I told myself I did. Then came the phone behavior. At home, Julia had never been one to hover over her phone. But now? She was glued to it. Always flipping it face down when I entered the room. Taking calls in the backyard instead of the kitchen. Once, I walked in while she was texting, and she instinctively locked the screen, smiling at me like I had just interrupted something I wasn't supposed to see. Then came the first real red flag. It was a Tuesday night, and I was helping Oliver with his math homework when Julia stepped outside to take a call. Through the kitchen window, I saw her pacing on the back patio, her free hand in her hair, her voice softer than usual. She laughed, soft, flirty. Then, she said something that stopped me cold. I miss you too. My stomach clenched, but I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just stood there, gripping Oliver's pencil, trying to rationalize what I had just heard. She walked back in a few minutes later, acting like nothing had happened. I asked casually, "Who was that?" She smiled, pecked me on the cheek, and said, "Just Claire from work. She's going through a rough time." Then she grabbed a glass of water and walked upstairs. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the seed had been planted. And it was about to grow into something I never saw coming. I didn't sleep much that night. I told myself I was overthinking things, that I was being paranoid, reading too much into a simple sentence. Maybe she really had been talking to Claire. Maybe it was an inside joke, the way she said "I miss you too." Maybe I was just a jealous, insecure husband seeing ghosts where there weren't any. But I knew myself. I wasn't the jealous type. I wasn't the kind of man who pried into his wife's phone or questioned her every move. In 13 years of marriage, I had never once doubted Julia's loyalty. Not once. And yet, something about that conversation felt wrong. I told myself I'd let it go. That lasted about 2 days. The first clue. It was Thursday night, and Julia was supposed to be working late. She had an important project deadline and would be stuck in the office until at least 9 p.m. The kids were already in bed, and I was finishing up some work emails when her laptop, sitting open on the kitchen counter, lit up with a new notification. It was from her calendar. Event reminder, hotel reservation, 7:30 p.m. with the Maplewood Inn. A chill ran down my spine. The Maplewood Inn. A small boutique hotel about 15 minutes from our house. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. It could be work-related, I reasoned. Maybe it's a dinner meeting with clients. But then I saw the rest of the event description. Room 214, under name, J. Lawson. Lawson. Her maiden name. My pulse was thundering in my ears now. My hands felt numb as I reached for my phone. I checked the time. 7:45 p.m. She wasn't at the office. She was at that hotel. The drive over. I don't remember making the decision to go. 1 minute I was standing in the kitchen, my body locked in place, my mind screaming at me to do something, and the next, I was in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The drive felt surreal, like I was floating outside my own body, watching some other version of myself heading straight towards something that would shatter everything I believed about my marriage. I didn't want to be right. I prayed I wasn't right. But I knew. Deep down, I already knew. When I pulled into the parking lot of the Maplewood Inn, my stomach was in knots. I parked a few spaces away from the entrance, scanning the lot for Julia's car. And there it was. Neatly parked under one of the dim overhead lamps. The confirmation. For a long moment, I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, my mind screaming at me to turn back. Maybe you don't need to know. Maybe it's better not to see it. But I had to. I stepped out of the car and made my way toward the front desk, my heart hammering against my ribs. The clerk, a young guy in his 20s, barely looked up when I approached. I forced myself to stay calm. Hey, I need to check if my wife is staying here. Room 214. The clerk gave me a bored look. Sorry, sir, we can't give out guest information. I expected that. So I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and showed him the most recent transaction, a $186 charge from the Maplewood Inn. His face changed. He looked uncomfortable now, shifting in his seat. She's here, isn't she? I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated. Then he nodded. She checked in about an hour ago. I swallowed hard. My mouth was dry. I turned on my heel and headed straight for the elevator. The moment of truth. I didn't hesitate. I didn't stop to think. I marched down the second-floor hallway, every step bringing me closer to something I knew I couldn't undo. The door to room 214 was at the very end of the corridor. I stopped in front of it, my chest heaving. Voices. A man's voice. Julia's voice. I don't remember pulling out my phone, but suddenly I was recording. My hand was shaking as I reached for the doorknob. It wasn't locked. The moment I pushed it open, time slowed. There she was. Julia. My wife. Sitting on the edge of the bed, her blouse unbuttoned, her hair slightly messy, a man standing in front of her, his hand on her shoulder. The world stopped. For a long, terrible second, no one moved. Julia's eyes met mine, and her face drained of color. The man, tall, fit, wearing a button-up that was halfway undone, froze, his eyes widening in horror. Ethan. She started to say something, but I couldn't hear her over the blood rushing in my ears. My vision tunneled. I saw nothing but her. Her betrayal. Her lies. Everything I had ignored, every doubt, every gut feeling I had shoved down over the past few months, it all slammed into me at once, leaving me breathless. She scrambled up from the bed, her hands shaking. Ethan, it's not what it looks like. I laughed. A cold, bitter sound. Really? She flinched. Please, let me explain. The man, whoever the hell he was, took a cautious step forward, raising his hands. Look, man, I didn't know she was married. I snapped. I lunged at him, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the wall so hard the framed hotel artwork rattled. You didn't know? I snarled. That's your excuse? Ethan, stop. Julia grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. Please, don't do this. I let him go. I stepped back, chest heaving, heart pounding like a war drum. Then I looked at Julia. really looked at her. The woman I had built a life with. The mother of my children. The person I had trusted more than anyone in the world. I had 1,000 things I wanted to say. 1,000 words ready to explode out of me. But only one came out. Why? Her lips parted, but nothing came. Because there was no answer. Not one that would ever make this okay. And just like that, I knew. Our marriage was over. I didn't leave. Not right away. I should have. I should have turned around, walked out of that hotel room, and let her deal with the weight of what she'd done. But I couldn't. I stood there, staring at her, my entire body thrumming with adrenaline, pain, and something dangerously close to rage. Julia looked like she wanted to crawl inside herself and disappear. Her hands trembled as she quickly buttoned up her blouse, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for the right words. There were no right words. The man, the piece of shit who had his hands on my wife moments ago, was watching me carefully, his stance tense like he was expecting me to throw another punch. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But I forced myself to take a breath. I wasn't going to give either of them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Finally, Julia spoke. Ethan, her voice was soft, pleading. Let's talk about this. Please. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. Talk? Now you want to talk? She winced. I know how this looks. Do you? I snapped, stepping forward. Because from where I'm standing, it looks a hell of a lot like my wife just got caught cheating in a fucking hotel room. Her face crumpled. It's not. Don't. I held up a hand, cutting her off. Do not insult me by trying to lie right now. Silence. Her eyes darted to the guy beside her. He had the nerve to look uncomfortable, shifting his weight like he wasn't sure if he should stay or leave. I turned my attention to him. You. My voice was cold, sharp enough to cut. Who the fuck are you? He hesitated. I took a step closer. I ask you a question. Nick, he muttered. I raised an eyebrow. Nick what? He swallowed hard. Nick Jacobs. Jacobs. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. I didn't care. Do you have a wife, Nick? I asked, my voice deceptively calm. His jaw clenched. No. A girlfriend? Not anymore. I huffed out a bitter laugh. Figures. Julia ran a shaky hand through her hair. Ethan, can we please just? No, my voice was sharp, final. We are not doing this here. You're coming home. Now. She hesitated. That hesitation was another dagger to the heart. Or do you need to finish whatever the hell this is first? I asked, my voice dripping with venom. That snapped her out of it. She grabbed her purse, practically shoving past Nick in her hurry to leave. I turned back to him one last time. If I ever see you near my wife again, you're going to regret it. Nick didn't say a word. Julia walked out first. I followed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The car ride home. The drive back was silent. She sat in the passenger seat, wringing her hands together, staring out the window like she wished she were anywhere but here. I kept my eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had 1,000 things I wanted to say. But if I opened my mouth now, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop. I needed a clear head for this. Julia shifted beside me, inhaling sharply. Ethan. Don't, I said flatly. She flinched. For the next 15 minutes, we sat in unbearable silence. When we finally pulled into our driveway, she hesitated before reaching for the door handle. I got out without a word, slamming my door shut, and walked straight inside. The showdown. The moment we stepped into the house, I turned to face her. Start talking. She swallowed. Ethan, I cut her off. How long? She blinked. How long has this been going on, Julia? I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. She licked her lips. A few weeks. Bullshit. I stepped closer. Try again. She closed her eyes. 3 months. My stomach turned. 3 months. While I was home with our kids, while I was cooking dinner and helping with homework and waiting for her to come home from late meetings, she was doing this. With who else? I asked. She paled. Ethan, there's no one else. Liar. Tears filled her eyes. I swear, it was only Nick. I let out a sharp exhale, trying to push back the nausea threatening to overtake me. Why? My voice cracked. Why would you do this? She opened her mouth. Hesitated. Then, finally. I don't know. I let out a harsh laugh. You don't know? She covered her face with her hands. I wasn't thinking, Ethan. It wasn't planned. I got caught up in something I didn't know how to stop. Bullshit, I spat. You knew exactly what you were doing. Every time you snuck off, every time you lied to my face, you knew. She wiped at her tears. I didn't mean to hurt you. I slammed my hand against the wall. But you did, Julia. My voice rose, raw and broken. You fucking did. Silence. She sniffled. Do you still love me? The question nearly knocked the wind out of me. Because the truth was, I didn't know anymore. I stared at her, the woman I had loved for 13 years, the mother of my children, the person I thought I knew better than anyone in this world, and I didn't recognize her. I didn't recognize us. And that was the worst part. I took a step back, my chest rising and falling. I don't know. Tears streamed down her face. Ethan, please. I turned away. I need space, I muttered. She didn't stop me as I walked upstairs. She didn't say a word as I shut the bedroom door behind me. And for the first time in 13 years, I didn't sleep next to my wife. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every possible scenario. Divorce. Revenge. Making her suffer the way she had made me suffer. Kicking her out and watching her beg. But no matter how many times I ran through the possibilities, nothing felt satisfying. Because no matter what I did next, one fact remained. I would never get back what I had lost. My trust. My marriage. The life I thought I had. By the time the sun started creeping through the blinds, I was exhausted but no closer to a decision. The only thing I knew for sure? I needed to get out of that house. The escape. When I finally got up, Julia was already awake. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in front of her, but she wasn't drinking it. She was just staring at it, her eyes swollen and red from crying. When she saw me, she straightened. Ethan. I need to get out of here, I said, my voice hoarse. Panic flickered across her face. Where are you going? I grabbed my keys from the counter. I don't know. Ethan, please, can we talk? I ignored her and walked out the door. I didn't stop moving until I was in my car, peeling out of the driveway like I was escaping a burning building. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't be there. The first call. I ended up at a park about 10 miles from our house, sitting in my car, staring blankly at the dashboard. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my best friend, Ryan. Ryan and I had been close since college, but over the years, life had gotten in the way. We both got married, had kids, got caught up in the daily grind. We still talked, but not as often as we used to. I didn't even know if he'd pick up. But he did. Ethan? Damn, man, it's been a while. I swallowed hard. Yeah. There was a pause. What's wrong? I opened my mouth. But nothing came out. I couldn't say it. couldn't make the words real. Ryan waited. And then, finally, I whispered, she cheated. Silence. Then, where are you? I gave him the name of the park. Stay there, he said. I'm coming. The breakdown. Ryan showed up 20 minutes later, pulling into the parking spot next to mine. The moment I saw him, something inside me cracked. I had spent the last 12 hours holding everything in, keeping myself together. But when I saw my oldest friend step out of his car, looking at me with nothing but concern, it all came crashing down. I broke. I didn't cry. Not exactly. But I sat there, staring at the steering wheel, my whole body shaking with silent rage and grief. Ryan climbed into the passenger seat and didn't say anything. He just waited. Finally, I let out a hollow laugh. I walked in on them. His eyes darkened. What the fuck? At a hotel, I continued, my voice flat. She told me she was working late. But she had a goddamn reservation under her maiden name. Ryan exhaled sharply. Jesus. I rubbed a hand over my face. I don't even know what to do. Ryan was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "What do you want to do?" I looked at him. And for the first time, I let myself admit it. I want to destroy her. The plan. We sat there for the next hour, going over my options. Ryan, being the hot-headed idiot he was, suggested everything from public humiliation to hiring a private investigator to dig up dirt on her. But I didn't need an investigator. I had everything I needed already. Her lies. Her texts. The video I had recorded when I walked into that hotel room. I could ruin her. Blow up her life. Make sure everyone knew what she had done. But as we sat there, talking through it, I realized something. I didn't just want revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done. I wanted her to pay. And I knew exactly how to make that happen. The execution. I started by contacting a lawyer. I wasn't ready to make a decision yet, but I wanted to know my options. And what I found out? It was bad for Julia. Our state still considered adultery as grounds for divorce. And because she had cheated, I had the upper hand in everything. The house. The custody agreement. Even the financials. If I played my cards right, I could walk away with everything. And she would be left with nothing. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go that far. But I wanted her to know that I could. The confrontation, round 2. When I finally went home that night, Julia was waiting for me in the living room. She looked wrecked. "Where have you been?" she asked softly. "Figuring out my next move," I said bluntly. Her breath hitched. "Ethan, please." I sat down across from her. And then, in the calmest voice I could manage, I said, "I met with a lawyer today." Her face crumpled. "Ethan, do you know what I found out?" I continued, my voice steady. "Because you cheated, I can take everything from you. The house. The money. The kids." She gasped. "No." "Oh, yes," I said coldly. "And guess what? I have proof. That video I took? That's admissible in court." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Ethan, please, don't do this." "Don't do what?" I demanded. "Don't do to you what you did to me?" She sobbed. I stared at her, my chest tight, my hands clenched into fists. And then I said the words that would change everything. "You chose this, Julia. You threw away our marriage for some asshole in a hotel room." "I made a mistake," she whispered. "No," I said. "You made a choice." Silence. She wiped at her tears. "What happens now?" I exhaled. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I promise you this, you're not getting off easy." Her face crumpled again. I didn't care. For the first time in 12 hours, I finally felt like I was in control again. And I wasn't about to let that go. The house felt like a war zone. Not the kind with screaming matches or broken dishes. No, this was a different kind of battlefield. The quiet kind. The kind where two people move around each other like landmines, careful not to step too close, careful not to detonate what's already been set in motion. Since my ultimatum, Julia had been walking on eggshells, barely speaking unless necessary. She made breakfast for the kids, asked about their school day, and then disappeared into the bedroom the moment they were asleep. She didn't try to touch me. She didn't even try to talk to me. Good. Because there was nothing left to say. Or at least, that's what I thought. The breaking point. It was a Friday night when it finally happened. The kids were asleep. The house was silent. And then Julia knocked on the bedroom door. Not our bedroom. The guest room. Where I'd been sleeping for the past week. I ignored her at first, but the knocking didn't stop. I sighed, rubbing my face before finally getting up and opening the door. She looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes. Face pale. Shoulders tense. It didn't stir any sympathy in me. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice flat. She swallowed. "We need to talk." I exhaled through my nose. "There's nothing left to talk about." "Please," she whispered. I stared at her. Then, without a word, I stepped aside, letting her in. She hesitated before walking inside, wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold. I leaned against the dresser, arms crossed. "Talk." She opened her mouth. Then closed it. For a long moment, she just stood there, eyes glassy, lips pressed together. Finally, she whispered, "Do you really hate me?" I blinked. Of all the things she could have said, that was not what I expected. My fingers curled into fists. "I don't know." Her breath hitched. "Ethan, I don't," I said sharply. "Do not try to explain it. I don't want to hear excuses." She wiped at her face, breathing shakily. After a long silence, she said, "I don't want a divorce." I laughed bitterly. "Well, that makes one of us." She flinched. "I want to fix this," she whispered. I stared at her. "You can't fix this, Julia." "I can try." "Try what?" My voice rose, my patience snapping. "Try to erase what you did? Try to make me forget that I walked in on you with another man?" She swallowed hard. "I made a mistake." "No," I shook my head. "A mistake is something you do by accident. You chose this." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I was lonely." I scoffed. "Lonely? You had me. You had us." Her face crumpled. "I know. I know. And I hate myself for what I did." I clenched my jaw. "Not enough." Her breathing was uneven now. "Ethan, I don't want to lose you. I don't want to break up our family." "Too late." "No, it's not," she pleaded. "We can go to counseling. We can work through this." I let out a cold laugh. "You think a therapist is going to make me forget what I saw? That I'm just going to magically trust you again?" She wiped at her tears furiously. "I'll do anything. Please, just tell me what you need." I stared at her. And then I said the one thing I had been holding back. "I need to stop loving you." The words shattered something in her. She let out a strangled sob, hands clutching her stomach like I had physically struck her. I didn't feel guilty. She deserved worse. She sucked in a shaky breath. "What about the kids?" I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. "I'm not going to take them from you," I said. "But I'm also not going to pretend like this didn't happen. We're getting divorced." Her lip trembled. "Please don't do this." I let out a slow, tired breath. Then I turned away. There's nothing left to save, Julia. She let out a broken sob. I walked to the door and opened it. Go. She stared at me, her body shaking, her face crumpled with grief. Then, finally, she nodded. And for the first time in 13 years, she walked out of my life. The final goodbye. The next morning, I packed a bag. I wasn't ready to sit in that house with her. So I left. I told the kids I was going on a short trip for work, something I would never normally do, but I wasn't ready to tell them the truth. Not yet. Not until I had a plan. I drove 2 hours to a quiet cabin owned by my cousin. And for the first time in days, I let myself feel everything. The rage. The betrayal. The bone-deep sadness. I punched a hole in the cabin wall. Then I sat on the floor and stared at nothing for hours. I don't know how long I sat there. But eventually, I pulled out my phone. I opened my messages. I stared at Julia's name. Then I deleted our entire conversation. Every text. Every memory. Everything. She was gone. And I was finally ready to move on. The cabin was silent. No kids. No phone buzzing. No sound of Julia moving around the house. Just the distant rustling of trees outside and the occasional creak of the wooden walls. I had spent the last 2 days doing nothing. No work. No emails. No plans. Just existing. Because that's what it felt like I was just there, like my body was moving through the motions of being alive, but my mind was still trapped in that hotel room, still stuck in the moment I saw Julia and him together. I had played it over 1,000 times. The way she looked at me. The way her face drained of color. The way she hesitated before following me home. I wanted to erase it from my memory. But I couldn't. Because that moment, that exact moment, was the one where my entire world fell apart. And no matter how much time passed, I didn't think I would ever fully put the pieces back together. A call I wasn't expecting. On the third morning, my phone rang. I almost ignored it. But when I saw my brother's name on the screen, I sighed and picked up. Yeah? Jesus, Ethan. Took you long enough? I rubbed my temples. What do you want, Matt? He hesitated. Then, in a softer voice, he said, Mom called me. I exhaled. Of course she did. She said Julia told her everything. I sat up. She what? She called Mom. Told her about the affair. About you wanting a divorce. He paused. Mom said she was crying the whole time. I let out a bitter laugh. Good. Matt sighed. Ethan, listen. I know you're pissed. You have every right to be. But you need to come home. I tensed. Why? The kids. My stomach twisted. What about them? They're confused, man. You just disappeared. Oliver keeps asking when you're coming back. Emma keeps crying at night. They don't understand what's happening. I closed my eyes. Fuck. I had been so wrapped up in my own pain that I hadn't thought about how this was affecting them. I just needed time, I muttered. I get it, Matt said. But they need their dad. And you need to figure out what's next. I ran a hand down my face. I hated that he was right. But he was. Going home. The drive back felt surreal. Like I was heading toward something final. Something I couldn't undo. When I pulled into the driveway, Julia's car was there. I sat in the car for a long moment, gripping the wheel, steadying myself. Then I got out. The second I stepped inside, I heard small footsteps pounding against the hardwood floor. And then Emma launched herself at me, wrapping her little arms around my waist. Daddy, she sobbed. I crouched down, hugging her tight. Hey, baby. It's okay. She sniffled. I thought you weren't coming back. My heart shattered. I kissed the top of her head. I'm here, sweetheart. I promise. Oliver appeared in the hallway, his face hesitant. I stood up, holding out a hand. After a moment, he walked forward and hugged me. I held them both, closing my eyes, breathing them in. This was the only thing that mattered. Not Julia. Not the betrayal. Just them. My kids. My family. Or at least, what was left of it. The real goodbye. That night, after the kids were asleep, Julia and I sat at the kitchen table. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "Are you really leaving me?" I exhaled. "You left me first." She flinched. I leaned forward, folding my hands. "Julia, I don't hate you." She looked up, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "You don't?" "No," I swallowed. "But I don't love you anymore, either." Tears spilled over. I didn't look away. Because this was the moment. The moment that truly ended it. The moment where I let her go. "I'll always care about you," I said. "Because you're the mother of my kids. But we're done." She let out a choked sob, covering her face. I didn't comfort her. Because this time, I wasn't the one who needed saving. A new beginning. 2 weeks later, I moved into my new apartment. It wasn't much. Just a small 2-bedroom place a few miles from the house. But it was mine. My fresh start. The first night alone, I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, feeling the weight of everything. The divorce papers were signed. The custody agreement was settled. Julia and I were officially over. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was just free. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.